Hey guys, tonight we're diving face first into the foul, festering, and absolutely soul-erasing world of medieval plague doctors. You know, those creepy figures in beaked masks that look like something out of a horror movie and show up in every Halloween costume shop next to sexy werewolf and inflatable banana. Except this wasn't a costume. This was your uniform. And those weren't rumors. That was your actual job, walking into plague houses, prodding corpses with a stick, and praying to every saint you could name before the smell made your nose bleed internally. So before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy historical despair with a side of infectious fluids. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. And more importantly, what time it is, because this episode works best in the dark when the cough in the hallway makes you sit up straight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, light a candle if you're feeling thematic, and let's begin tonight's cozy descent into anatomical horror. Let's be perfectly clear. You would not last a day as a medieval plague doctor. You wouldn't even last an hour. You'd step out of your front door and immediately regret every decision that led you to this profession, assuming you even had the dignity of choosing it in the first place. Because despite the romantic idea of brave doctors striding through the carnage of medieval pandemics to heal the sick and comfort the dying, the truth is this: plague doctors were underpaid, undertrained, overexposed, and very often the first ones to die horribly, messily, and alone. You weren't a healer. You were bait. Human-shaped bait wrapped in vinegar-soaked rags and a bird mask designed by someone who clearly hated the human respiratory system. And no, you didn't become a plague doctor because you had a medical degree or a passion for saving lives. You got the job because you were either too poor to say no, too desperate to care, or just unlucky enough to be literate in a town that had run out of options. Cities didn't post job listings like wanted competent physician with plague experience. No, they sent some trembling official to the edge of quarantine with a sack of coins, a contract written on worm-eaten parchment, and a look in their eyes that said, "You're not coming back, are you?" The deal was simple. Show up, poke the dying with a stick, maybe bleed a few of them, and try not to catch whatever made them cough up black blood and scream themselves to death. Forget glory. Forget gratitude. Nobody thanked you. Nobody cheered when you walked by. They shut their windows, crossed themselves, and hoped you weren't there for their house. Because when the plague doctor showed up, it didn't mean help was arriving. It meant someone inside was already halfway to the afterlife, and the rest were about to follow. You were the angel of death in a leather trench coat, and people treated you like one, with fear, revulsion, and occasionally thrown objects. That mask you wore, it didn't make you look wise or mysterious. It made you look like a giant cursed pigeon who just stepped out of nightmare opera. And you know what? That was probably the point. Because your job wasn't about healing. It was about managing chaos. You didn't walk into homes with a stethoscope and a smile. You entered reeking, fly-infested houses with a sense of dread, a shaky pulse, and a wooden stick you called an exam tool, but mostly used to see if the body on the floor was still twitching. You were supposed to diagnose, treat, and record cases, but your toolkit included such cutting-edge methods as look at the boils, bleed them until they faint, and rub this. Questionable salve made from mold and tears on their armpits. Spoiler, none of it worked. The best you could do was write their name in your ledger before they stopped breathing, then scratch it out before they did the same to you. And don't go thinking you were some noble volunteer either. Most plague doctors were hired by the city not out of respect, but out of sheer panic. You were a disposable professional, a walking clipboard with a pulse. You were hired to count the bodies, not save the souls. And if you died, which let's be honest, you were going to, they'd just find someone else, sew them into the same unwashed uniform, and hand them the same stick. Your death wouldn't even delay the shift change. They'd just wipe the mask with vinegar and hope for the best. So when you imagine yourself striding through medieval streets like some heroic healer in a time of crisis, remember this. You weren't walking through the city. You were walking through an open graveyard that hadn't finished filling itself. You didn't wear that outfit because it worked. You wore it because it made you look slightly less like the next corpse and slightly more like someone who maybe, possibly, knew what they were doing, which you didn't. But neither did anyone else. This was medicine by candlelight, science by rumor, survival by accident. And your best day on the job meant you only threw up once, only lost one patient mid-sentence, and only cried yourself to sleep for an hour before the church bells woke you up for the next call. You think you could handle that? Please, you take one step into that stinking, coughing, screaming world and immediately turn around to beg for a job as a rat catcher instead. And even they didn't last long. No one in their right medieval mind ever woke up and thought, you know what sound fulfilling? Donning a beaked mask stuffed with herbs and walking straight into a plague house. That fantasy never happened. There were no dreamy-eyed apprentices carving future plague doctor into their wooden desks or humming cheerfully while brewing a poultice of desperation and crushed garlic. Becoming a plague doctor wasn't a calling. It was a sentence, a career path reserved not for the noble or the brilliant, but for the broke, the desperate, the disgraced, and the expendable. You didn't aspire to. You landed it the way people land in ditches, suddenly, painfully, and surrounded by filth. So how did someone become the unfortunate soul lurching from one infected door to another, trailing the scent of vinegar and hopelessness? Simple. You were available. That's it. You were a living man with a pulse, two hands, a vague sense of literacy, and the uncanny ability to sign a city contract without vomiting at the smell of death. In many towns, especially during the worst waves of the plague, you didn't even need to know medicine. You just had to not be dead yet. Cities weren't hiring experts. They were hiring warm bodies with a strong stomach and no surviving relatives to sue them. And once they roped you in, with promises of hazard pay and vague mentions of civic duty, they locked the city gates behind you and told you not to come back until you'd done your part, which usually meant perish quietly and take notes. There were, of course, a few real physicians who became plague doctors, and by real, we mean they owned a book, knew how to pronounce humors, and had dissected at least one pig. These were often second sons of minor nobility, university dropouts, or disgraced barbershop surgeons whose last patient bled out during tonsillectomy. They took the job because no one else would hire them, or because their names were already on the plague rolls anyway, and they figured they might as well die with a salary. Some even saw it as penance, a way to earn back God's favor after a few morally questionable decisions involving wine, nuns, or ill-fated trepanations. But even the educated ones didn't know what they were doing. There was no cure, no antibiotics, no clear cause, just theories ranging from bad air to divine wrath to an unfortunate alignment of Mars. So whether you were a scholar or a stable boy, your actual qualifications for plague work boiled down to, can you hold a stick and not cry every time someone coughs? Many plague doctors weren't even from the towns they served. They were hired from outside. Strangers brought in on short notice because no one local was dumb or desperate enough to apply. These wandering medics were seen as both saviors and pariahs, welcomed at the city gates with a coin purse and a whispered prayer, then shunned the moment they started examining bodies. They slept in barns, ate alone, and were watched by every mother in town like they were death itself with a walking stick. And in a way, they were, because every time you opened a door, someone died, sometimes from the plague, sometimes from sheer terror, sometimes because your prescription involved leeches, a boiling rag, and a hastily whispered Hail Mary. Then there were the con men, the ones who saw a crisis and thought, finally, a chance to profit off the dead without digging graves. These are the fake doctors, The ones who learned just enough Latin to impress the council, brewed suspicious ointments in their cellar, and had business cards that read something like Master of Bubonic Remedies and Astrological Balancing. They came for the money and stayed for the deniability. When things went wrong, and they always did, they vanished. Slipped out of town in the dead of night with their fees and their fraudulent tinctures, leaving behind a trail of infected patients and deeply offended clergy. But perhaps the largest group, the real meat of the profession, were the volunteers who weren't really volunteering. These were the civic conscripts, people dragged in by circumstance, debt, exile, or sheer lack of options. Maybe you were a failed apothecary whose last mixture turned a merchant green. Maybe you were a prisoner offered freedom in exchange for walking into 10 infected houses and hoping for the best. Maybe you were just the only man in your village who hadn't fled, fainted, or fallen ill. Congratulations. You are now the doctor. Here's your mask, your stick, and a warning. Don't take it off, don't touch anyone, and definitely don't start crying again. That makes the boils worse. So when you picture the man behind the mask, don't imagine a wise physician with years of training and a noble purpose. Imagine a terrified, underqualified wreck in a leather cloak, sweating under 10 layers of panic, trying to remember whether rue or rosemary was supposed to go in the beak to keep the demons out. Imagine someone with no family left, no future waiting, and a contract that paid just enough to buy bread and not enough to buy a coffin. Because that's who became a plague doctor. The forgotten, the cornered, the doomed. Not heroes, not villains. Just the last men standing when everyone else ran away. Your first morning as a plague doctor begins the way all medieval horrors begin, with a sound. Not the sweet chirp of birds or the gentle rustling of trees, but the low, wet wheeze of someone trying to breathe through half a lung and a mouth full of blood. It leaks through the wallboards like a sick prayer. You haven't even opened your eyes yet, and already your brain is whispering that something is wrong. The air is too thick, too still. It clings to your face like a film of old grease. And something much, much worse. You breathe through your nose. Mistake. The smell hits you like a betrayal. Rot sweat, dried urine, burned herbs, and under all of it, that unmistakable iron stink of blood starting to turn. Welcome to your office. You're sleeping in what used to be a grain storehouse, now a quarantine quarters, hastily converted with a cot, a bucket, and a stack of parchment no one expects you to fill. The windows are nailed shut. The door sticks. There's no lock. Someone shoved a deadbolt into the wall at a strange angle, and it creaks like it's protesting your existence. You sit up. Every joint aches. You didn't sleep. You hallucinated with your eyes closed, dreaming of choking sounds and finger bones tapping your mask. You try to remember why you agreed to this job, but the answer doesn't come. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just too late to say no. You light a candle. You regret it immediately. The flame reveals details you'd rather leave hidden. The smears of something black along the walls. The puddle near the door that was definitely not water. And your boots, still crusted with whatever you stepped in yesterday. You stare at the bird mask lying beside your bed. It stares back. Hollow glass eyes, curved leather beak, and a faint smell of last week's despair soaked into the lining. You pick it up with both hands like it's a wounded animal and press it to your face. Fastening the straps with the same reverence priests give to relics. It doesn't help. The herbs inside, crushed lavender, dried rue, a piece of garlic someone swore was blessed, are wilted and damp. They don't purify the air. They marinate it. Then comes the knock. 2 sharp raps. No words. Just a reminder that someone expects you to go outside. You open the door and the world punches you in the lungs. There's fog, but not the romantic kind. This is industrial strength plague fog, thick with chimney soot, the ash of burned bedding, and something that smells suspiciously like fried skin. The street is empty, but not quiet. You hear coughing from every direction, some wet and ragged, others sharp like bone snapping. A dog barks. It's not a happy bark. It sounds hungry. You step outside, and your boot lands in something soft. You don't look down right away. You already know it's not mud. It's a pig, or what used to be one. Its body is bloated, legs splayed out like a drunken saint, and the skin around its snout has burst open like a rotten fruit. Flies hum around it with religious intensity. You wonder if it died from the plague, or if someone left it here as a message. Either way, no one moved it. That's your job now. Not moving pigs, but stepping over them. You try to remember the route for today. There's a list. 5 houses, 2 confirmed deaths, 1 suspected, 1 child. 1 family that stopped answering the door 3 days ago. You start walking. The mass forces every breath to pass through the herbal mush in your beak, turning your lungs into a low-grade fermentation chamber. You're already sweating. The first house is at the edge of the district. It has a red X painted on the door and a nail through the latch, a sign that someone inside is sick and the rest of the town would like them to stay that way. You knock. No answer. You knock again, more forcefully, still nothing. The third time, the door creaks open by itself. Inside, it's dark. You hear movement. Not footsteps, just a shift of weight like something dragging itself across straw. You enter slowly, raising your stick ahead of. You like it might deflect death. You find a woman on the floor, curled around a bundle. The bundle coughs. She doesn't. You step closer. Her eyes are open, but she's not seeing you anymore. You kneel, check for breath. Nothing. She's cold. The bundle shifts again. It's a child, fevered, glassy-eyed, and making a noise like he's trying to speak through soup. You write it down. 1 dead. 1 living. You don't have medicine. You have a jar of leeches, a flask of vinegar, and a prayer you stopped believing in 3 towns ago. You dab the boy's lips with cloth, sprinkle dried sage near the window, and promise to return. You won't. By tomorrow, there'll be another X on the door. As you leave, a neighbor slams their shutter closed. No one wants to see the plague doctor. You are a symbol, a walking omen, a feathered silhouette that means someone has died or is about to. Children point. Dogs growl. Cats vanish. You wonder if they know something you don't. You reach the next house. Same smell, same silence. Inside, 3 bodies. You don't bother counting. You don't bother praying. You mark the door and move on. This is your morning routine now. Death, notes, coughing. More death. You're not healing. You're cataloging an apocalypse. By noon, your beak is clogged with damp herbs. Your gloves are sticky, and you've started hearing bells that aren't there. Someone asks if it's safe to fetch water from the well. You shrug. You don't know. No one knows. The well might be cursed. The air might be cursed. You might be cursed. The only thing you're sure of is this. You haven't even made it to lunch, and already your stomach is turning, your vision is swimming, and you're seriously considering lying down next to that pig and pretending to be one more casualty. Because if this is the beginning of your day, you don't want to know how it ends. The first time you wear the full plague doctor outfit, you assume, foolishly, that it was designed for protection. That the layers, the leather, the beak, the gloves, the boots, the robe, the hood, the eyeglass lenses, all of it must serve some kind of medical purpose. But as you force your arms into stiff sleeves that crackle like old parchment and tighten the straps of a mask that smells like spoiled vinegar and rats, you realize the truth. This isn't armor. It's a death sentence sewn together with superstition and blind hope. You're not wrapped in science. You are wrapped in a sweaty, creaking monument to fear. The robe comes first. It's thick waxed canvas or boiled leather, depending on how much your city spent on your dignity. It's heavy, stiff, and clings to your body like regret. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't bend. It's designed to keep out the miasma, That deadly air people believe carries the plague, but it also keeps in every drop of your sweat, every whimper of discomfort, and every embarrassing grunt as you try to crouch over a corpse without tearing something in the crotch. The coat reaches your ankles. It drags in the filth of the streets, catches on door frames, and picks up lice like a parade float collects confetti. You can't run in it. You can't sit comfortably, but at least no one can see you cry underneath it. Then the gloves. They're leather too, long and awkward, meant to cover as much skin as possible. They slide on with a squelch, already damp from yesterday's exertion, because there's no spare pair and definitely no time to let them dry. The fingers don't fit quite right. You lose all dexterity. Every attempt to hold your instruments becomes a game of slippery approximation. You've never fumbled so many spoons, scalpels, and sad little sacks of herbs in your life. When you grip your stick, it wobbles. When you try to write, the quill slips. It doesn't matter. No one can read your handwriting anyway. The boots are the worst. Heavy, reinforced, built like you're going to war, which in a way you are. They keep your feet dry for maybe 20 steps before the first puddle seeps in around the seams. After that, every step squelches. You carry the city's sickness in your soles. Mud, ash, blood, and things you hope were once edible cling to the treads. You stop noticing the smell after the third hour, or maybe you just surrender to it. In these boots, you're not walking. You're wading through. Death with steel on your toes and blisters on your heels. And then, the mask. The famous beaked monstrosity. The moment you put it on, everything changes. The world narrows. Sound becomes muffled, filtered through waxed linen and buzzing blood pressure. Your vision is limited to two foggy glass circles that reflect your own panic back at you. The beak juts out absurdly, filled with crumbled herbs, old sweat, and someone's idea of apothecary aromatherapy. Supposedly, it protects you. In practice, it does nothing but keep the worst of the smell at bay. And even that only if you don't inhale too sharply. The beak bounces slightly when you walk like it's mocking you. Every time you bend down, it bangs into your chest with a wet thud. Children scream when they see it. Adults flinch. You stop trying to explain yourself. You don't speak in this outfit. You grunt, gesture, and hope no one comes close enough to need clarification. Altogether, it takes nearly half an hour to put the full ensemble on. By the end, you're sweating through your undershirt. Your knees are aching, and your mask smells like mildew and stress. You haven't even left your quarters yet, and you already feel like collapsing. Movement becomes an exercise in misery. Stairs are hell. Narrow doorways are traps. Every visit to a plague house is a 3-act tragedy involving stuck sleeves, pinched toes, and a mask lens smeared with God knows what. And you. Don't take it off. Not ever. Because once you're out there, you don't know who's infected, who's about to die, or what's clinging to the air like invisible knives. So you stay sealed, hot, blind, breathless, and miserable. You live inside a rotting bird costume that makes you look like death and feel like a poorly stuffed sausage left out in the sun. And what happens if your robe tears? If your glove splits? If someone grabs your sleeve and coughs in your face before you can recoil? You don't get a fresh set. You don't get new gear. You get vinegar. That's it. You soak the spot, mutter a prayer, and hope the gods of disease are feeling generous today. Some doctors stitch their robes by candlelight, reusing thread they pulled from the corpses they just examined. Others wrap their boots in rags soaked in alcohol, which mostly just gives the rat something new to chew. You do what you can, and what you can do is never enough. This outfit is not your shield. It's your coffin stitched early. You're already dead. You just haven't collapsed yet. Every day you wear it, you lose something: your patience, your comfort, your ability to feel the breeze on your skin. You become a thing in a beak, a walking warning. You knock on doors, and people see the costume before they see the man. You stop being human. You become a symbol, and eventually, even to yourself. That's all you are. You don't realize how horrible the mask truly is until you have to breathe through it for more than 5 minutes. At first, it just feels awkward, a heavy, bird-like contraption strapped to your face like a punishment. But the longer you wear it, the more you understand. This is not a piece of medical equipment. It is a slow suffocation device, wrapped in superstition and stitched together by someone who clearly thought air was optional. Every breath inside the mask is a struggle, not because the air is toxic, but because your lungs are being filtered through a swamp of damp herbs, moldy linen, and your own rising panic. Inside the beak is a sad little bouquet of whatever passed for protective medicine in the Middle Ages. Lavender, rosemary, wormwood, myrrh, rue, cloves, dried mint, and occasionally something that used to be a garlic bulb before time and moisture transformed it into a gray, collapsing sponge. The logic, if you can call it that, is that the plague travels through bad air, and if you fill your nose with aggressively good-smelling plants, the evil can't get in. It's nonsense, but it's all you have. So every morning, you pack the beak like you're stuffing a turkey, cramming dried petals and roots into the curved leather snout until you can't fit anything else. Then you strap it on and begin the slow process of forgetting what normal breathing ever felt like. The mask changes everything. Your field of vision shrinks to two murky circles. Your voice disappears behind layers of fabric and echoing air. You try to speak, but the words come out muffled, distant, like someone shouting through a hollow log in the rain. Nobody can hear you unless you shout, and shouting means opening your mouth wider, which means sucking in more of the stale, recycled, rosemary-flavored air that's been bouncing around in that bird cavity since dawn. The beak traps heat. Your breath condenses on the glass lenses, which fog up with every exhale. Eventually, you stop trying to wipe them clear. You just squint through the blur, pretending you can still see the difference between a corpse and a really tired baker. And then there's the sound, the constant, awful sound of your own breathing. Loud, wet, rhythmic. You sound like a dying goose trying to inflate a wineskin. Every breath is amplified inside the mask, bouncing off the beak and back into your ears like a personal horror soundtrack. Sometimes you try to breathe quietly, especially when you're tiptoeing into plague houses and don't want to alert the dying to your presence. But it's impossible. Your mask makes everything louder. You wheeze like a furnace. You pant like a cursed animal, and everyone hears you coming. You are the loudest form of death imaginable. Not a silent reaper, but a walking bellows in a black robe. The longer you wear it, the worse it gets. The herbs start to rot. The fabric inside the beak becomes damp from breath and heat, turning the whole interior into a sponge of microbial soup. If you're unlucky, a chunk of mint will dislodge and stick to your upper lip, where it will remain for hours until it either dries into a crust or gets accidentally inhaled mid-exertion. Sometimes flies get curious and land on the beak's tip, crawling around like they're waiting for an invitation inside. You swat them away with your stick, but they always come back. Something about the smell of decaying flowers and exhaled vinegar must appeal to them. You, however, are less charmed. Wearing the mask for long hours has other effects too. You start to forget how your own face feels. Your cheeks are constantly pressed against hard leather. Your nose gets pinched by the bridge. Your ears ache from the tension of the straps. And when you finally take it off, assuming you're brave enough to do so, the fresh air hits you like a betrayal. You gag, you cough, your lungs reject the breeze like it's poison. You've been breathing your own filtered exhaustion for so long that real. Air tastes foreign and offensive. And then the guilt hits you, because if you can breathe freely, that means you're not near the sick anymore, which also means you've probably left someone dying behind. You try to adjust the herbs. You try different combinations. One day you pack it with sage and cloves, another with vinegar-soaked linen and dried orange peel. Nothing helps. The air still smells like sweat, plague, and failure. Some doctors burn incense near their faces to drown it out. Some smear camphor paste under their noses until their eyes water. Some drink heavily, but the mask always wins. It clings to you, chews on your sanity, and reminds you with every inhale that you are not a healer. You're a placeholder, a mobile warning sign with a leather nose and a countdown inside your lungs. You stop thinking of it as a mask. It becomes your face, your real one, the human one, is buried beneath it, irrelevant. People don't recognize you. They don't want to. To them, you're the beak, the wheeze, the silhouette in the fog. Even when you take it off, no one looks you in the eyes. And eventually, neither do you. Your medical toolkit, the proud arsenal of the medieval plague doctor, fits into a single rat-chewed satchel and contains all the scientific precision of a traveling butcher with a drinking problem. There is no shining scalpel, no elegant set of instruments laid out on clean linen, no professional box labeled for emergencies only. What you carry instead is a pitiful collection of half-believed talismans and desperation props, cobbled together from hearsay, superstition, and the occasional market vendor who swore this one cured his uncle's goat. And that is what stands between you and a disease that turns lungs to sludge and skin into bursting sacks of rot. The first and most iconic item in your toolkit is the stick. Not a staff, not a cane, a stick, a long, slightly crooked, usually splintered piece of wood, sometimes varnished if you're lucky, but more often chipped, cracked, and sticky with things you'd rather not investigate. Officially, it's called an examination rod, which sounds fancy until you realize its primary use is poking people from a safe distance to see if they're alive. You use it to lift sheets, nudge corpses, point at rashes, and occasionally smack a rat if it gets too bold. In practice, it's a glorified plague prodder, and if it breaks, you replace it with a broom handle or a chair leg. No one cares. No one inspects your tools. You are the inspection. Next is your bottle of vinegar. It's not even proper vinegar. It's a foul-smelling fluid that started life as wine, went sour in a church basement, and was later blessed, boiled, or both. You use it for everything. Disinfecting your hands, dousing your gloves, wiping your stick, washing your mask, soaking your clothes, splashing the air, cleaning wounds, cleansing your soul, and once in a moment of blind panic, pouring it on a suspicious-looking pigeon. It does nothing. The plague does not. Recoil from vinegar. If anything, it probably enjoys the acidity. But you use it anyway because it's all you have. You stink of it. People smell you before they see you. You walk around town like a sentient salad, hoping that somewhere in the stench is a molecule that might save your life. Then come the knives. Not sleek surgical instruments, but whatever blades you could find, a paring knife, a fish gutter, a half-rusted dagger with a handle wrapped in twine. You use them rarely and badly, only when you absolutely must cut open a boil or slice away blackened skin. There is no finesse, no antiseptic, no suture. You don't stitch wounds. You press rags into them and mutter apologies. Sometimes you heat the blade until it glows and call it cauterization, but mostly it's just guesswork with fire. The tools don't shine. They don't get cleaned. You wipe them on your robe and move to the next patient, hoping your mask filters out the screams. You also carry herbs, not carefully labeled packets of medicinal plants, but crushed leaves, twigs, bark shavings, and whatever else a desperate apothecary dumped into your pouch while muttering about humor balance. You've got sage thyme, mint, sometimes dried rose petals if you're feeling optimistic, and a clump of moss that may or may not have medicinal properties, but at least smells better than everything else in your bag. You boil them, rub them on skin, mix them with wine, burn them in corners of plague houses, and pretend any of it makes a difference. It doesn't, but the families watch you expectantly, and you perform your little rituals because it's better than doing nothing, even if both things have the same outcome. And then there are the charms, religious medals, wooden crosses, pouches of salt, tiny bones from saints or animals or someone's lunch. You didn't ask for them, but people give them to you. They press them into your hands with trembling fingers, begging you to carry their hopes. Some you tie to your belt, others you shove in a pocket. They don't protect you, but on your worst days, they're the only reason you don't walk into the river and let the current carry your mass downstream. You have no bandages. You rip up old sheets. You have no medicines. You mix your own using wine, spit, and courage. You don't have a thermometer. You press your palm to fevered skin and pray it's just a hot day. Your most accurate diagnosis is still, that doesn't look good. Your treatment plan? Isolation, hydration, and hoping they don't explode. There are no books to consult, no experts to ask. Every question is rhetorical. Every cure is a coin flip with death. The hole in your knowledge isn't just large. It's the entire field. You're not a physician. You're a desperate man pretending to be one because the real ones are dead, fled, or hiding behind their monastery walls reciting psalms. You didn't study this. You weren't trained. You're improvising daily on human beings, while the most terrifying illness of your time rips through the population like a biblical plague with a grudge. And every time you fumble with your stick or spill vinegar on your notes or drop your knife mid-incision, you remember, you're not here to cure. You are here to witness. The people don't expect you to save them. They expect you to come, to look, to write down a name, and then leave. That's your job. That's your toolkit. A stick to poke, a bottle to pour, a knife to cut, a mask to muffle the screams, and a hole in your knowledge big enough to bury a city in. If you think medieval plague medicine involves some kind of structured learning or clinical method, let me shatter that illusion right now. Your knowledge, if one can call it that without choking on the irony, is a crumbling lattice of folklore, religious panic, and anatomical guesswork passed down by men who thought sneezing too hard could dislodge your soul. You weren't operating from a body of evidence. You were operating from superstition marinated in blood and bound in vellum. There were no peer-reviewed studies. There was no scientific consensus. There was just rumor, theology, and a whole lot of very dead people. You begin your day with theory, the kind that sounds official until you examine it. The air is bad. Everyone agrees on this. The miasma theory, the idea that disease comes from corrupted, foul-smelling air, rules medicine like a tyrant. You wear your mask not to filter bacteria, which no one knows exist, but to ward off the invisible vapors of death. You burn herbs in sick rooms, not to disinfect, but to sweeten the atmosphere and convince the spirits of disease to pick someone else. If that fails, you blame the stars. A conjunction of Mars and Saturn is a particularly popular scapegoat. Don't ask why. Astrology is medicine now. When you reach a patient, you assess their humors. You've memorized the list. Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Too much of one, and the body becomes imbalanced. You're not exactly sure what each one does, but that doesn't stop you. You squint at their tongue, sniff their breath, feel their forehead with a gloved hand that's touched 6 corpses today, and declare that they are suffering from excessive moisture or internal heat or some other abstract concept you barely understand. Then comes the treatment. You bleed them. Always a classic. Open a vein, let out the badness. If they faint, you did it right. If they die, they were too far gone. But maybe they need more. Maybe their soul is poisoned. So you prescribe a toad. You place a live one on the swelling. Not for comfort, for extraction. The toad is meant to suck the poison into itself, because that's how this is supposed to work. You don't question it. You've seen people do it. Sometimes the toad dies, which you interpret as proof it worked. Sometimes the toad lives, and you still say it worked, just slower. No one argues. They're too sick or too dead to debate you. Or maybe it's not the humors, maybe it's bad blood. You don't know what that means, but it sounds convincing. So you burn the infected area with a hot iron, cauterize the corruption. The patient screams. That's a good sign. It means they're still alive. You slap on a poultice made of vinegar, clay, and crushed flowers. It smells terrible. It is nothing. You sprinkle holy water near the bed, just in case. You whisper a psalm under your breath. You're not even religious anymore, but everyone else is. And sometimes the prayers are the only thing that keeps people from throwing you out the window. Your education consisted of maybe one book, copied by hand, translated badly, and illustrated by someone who had clearly never seen a human body before. The diagrams are all circles, arrows, and vaguely obscene-looking tubes. You learn anatomy from cutting open pigs, and you assume the human body worked the same way. Hard in the middle, lungs like bellows, brain like curdled milk. You have no idea what lymph nodes are. You call them evil pearls and try to lance them. The results are rarely encouraging. And let's not forget the real cornerstone of your medical philosophy, prayer. When nothing else works, which is always, you kneel by the bed, fold your hands, and ask whichever saint you haven't already begged that week to please spare this one. You recite lines you don't believe, invoke relics you suspect are fake, and light candles until the room is so hot the patient sweats through the sheets. If they recover, it's a miracle. If they don't, you say it was God's will. Either way, your reputation remains intact. People ask you what causes the plague. You lie. You say it's the air, the water, the stars, sin. Rats are never mentioned. Fleas are beneath notice. Microscopic life is pure fantasy. You explain away the patterns, the clusters, the strange coincidences with confidence, and a sort of authority that only comes from being completely wrong, but wearing a mask no one else dares to question. You draw charts, scribble notes, and pretend your ledger of death is a sacred medical journal. It's not. It's a list of names and dates and final words no one will read. In truth, your medical knowledge is a dark comedy performed in the shadow of mass extinction. Every prescription is a gamble. Every cure is a gamble. Every day you survive without catching the very disease you pretend to fight is a quiet, private miracle. And even as the evidence piles up that your treatments do nothing, you keep going, because the alternative is admitting that you're not a doctor at all. Just a man in a bird mask performing rituals over dying strangers, hoping no one notices. You've got no idea what you're doing. Your patients fall into 3 categories, and none of them are good. First, the dead, the easiest to diagnose, the most common to encounter, and the only ones who don't scream when you enter the room. Then, the almost dead, still breathing, technically alive, but clearly sliding toward the grave with the slow inevitability of an avalanche. And finally, the talkers, those rare, desperate few who cling to life and insist on telling you everything from the color of their phlegm to what their neighbors said last Thursday. You come to dread all 3 equally. The dead are everywhere, in beds, under beds, against walls, in corners, behind doors. Some are wrapped in sheets. Others are stiff and naked, eyes open, mouths frozen mid-sentence. You try not to look them in the face. You check for movement. You touch their neck, hold a mirror to their lips, prod them gently with your stick. No response. No breath. You write the name down, if you can find one. Sometimes there's a note pinned to the chest, scrawled by a trembling hand. Margot, age 35. Fever 2 days. Sometimes you guess. Woman, mid-30s, lesions on neck, missing 3 fingers. Died alone, or maybe with someone else who's currently dying on the floor. You step over them, carefully. You can't afford to slip. The almost dead are trickier. They look at you with that awful mix of hope and resignation, like they know they're dying but still think you might be the exception. You're not. You enter the room, and they try to sit up. You wave them down. Moving spreads the infection, or at least that's what you tell them. The truth is, you don't want to watch them die outright. It's harder to record. You check their pulse, feel their forehead, inspect the buboes, those swollen, blackened lymph nodes that mark the body like cursed stamps. Sometimes they talk. Mostly they moan. You dab vinegar on their sores. You offer water if there's any left. You try not to look them in the eyes, because they always ask the same question, will I live? And you always give the same lie. We're doing everything we can. And then there are the talkers. Oh, the talkers. The ones who haven't realized they're sick or refuse to believe it. They meet you at the door, babbling about fevers and family curses and bad oysters from a market. They want you to explain things. They want reassurance. They want to believe that this cough, this swelling, this oozing sore, it's not the plague. Maybe it's a cold. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's just bad air. You nod. You listen. You watch the way their hands tremble when they wipe their mouths. You see the red around the eyes, the purpling skin at the neck, and you know it's over. But you can't say that. You're here to help, not deliver death sentences, even though that's exactly what you're doing, one visit at a time. Some patients cry. Some scream. Some go silent the moment you walk in, like your presence alone is confirmation of the end. A few get violent. They don't want your treatments, your stick, your mask, your smell. They throw things. One old man hit you with a boot. Another tried to bite through your glove. You started carrying rope. Not to restrain them, to tie doors shut when you leave, to keep the plague in, to convince yourself you did something. And yet, despite all this, some patients beg you to stay. They don't want to die alone. They ask you to hold their hand. You hesitate, then lie. I'll come back tomorrow. There won't be a tomorrow for them. You know that. But they don't need to. You've learned to stop asking questions. You don't want to know their names. Names make it harder. You don't want to know who they were, who loved them, what they did before their skin turned purple and their breath came in wet, rattling bursts. Every story is a weight you can't carry. Every plea is a stone on your chest. So you shut it out. You become a function. You enter. You examine. You nod. You leave. Next house. Next death. But some patients break through. A child who clutches your sleeve. A mother singing to a baby who hasn't moved in hours. A man too weak to stand, whispering a prayer you haven't heard since your own childhood. You tell yourself not to feel. You're not here to mourn. You're here to count. But the plague doesn't care about your boundaries. It climbs inside you every time someone dies looking straight at you. And even the ones you help. If that word still means anything, don't stay helped. You lance a boil, and the next day their lungs are full of blood. You bleed them, and they seize up 2 hours later. You dose them with herbs, and they choke on their own tongue. Sometimes you think you've saved someone. A slight fever, mild symptoms, and a week later, you pass their corpse being wheeled to the mass grave. You wonder if it was something you did, or didn't do, or if it matters. Your patients don't blame you. Most of them can't. They're too far gone, or too grateful for any attention at all. But you blame yourself every night for the ones you couldn't save, for the ones who believed in you, for the ones who died quietly because they trusted your voice behind that mask. And yet, in the morning, you put on again and go back out because there are always more patients and fewer of you. The worst part isn't the sick, it's the living, the people who aren't coughing yet but already act like the world has ended. These are the homeowners, the caretakers, the landlords, the guardians of buildings that now serve as vertical plague pits held together by denial and the smell of boiled onions. They're not glad to see you. No one is. But homeowners in particular look at you like you're the tax collector and the angel of death rolled into one. The moment they see your silhouette, the mask, the black robe, the stick, doors slam, shutters snap shut, curtains jerk back into place with the urgency of someone hiding a body they didn't kill but definitely didn't help. Sometimes they greet you on the threshold, smiling too wide, speaking too fast, insisting that everyone inside is healthy and happy. Thank you very much. Oh, the girl with the rash? Heat boils. Happens every summer. We've got vinegar and prayers. No need for your trouble. You nod. You ask to step inside. The smile falters. The door closes a little more. They tell you they're disinfecting, that someone coughed near the pantry, but it was from dust, that the noise you just heard was the dog, who is also coughing, but only because he's old and dramatic. They invent illnesses you don't recognize, concoct explanations so desperate it becomes a kind of theater. The cough of anxiety, the rash of choleric humors, the sudden collapse due to poor posture. Other times, they block the door outright. They grip the frame like at a lifeboat into the tide. They beg, not for help, for absence. Please, don't come in. We'll take care of it. We've already burned the linens. She's resting. She's fine now. We prayed. You tell them it's your duty. They tell you they already buried the body. You ask where. They point vaguely at the garden. You look. The dirt's undisturbed. The smell says otherwise. You threaten to mark the house. They threaten to. Fetch the priest. Sometimes they do. And the priest lies too. Everyone lies because they know what your visit means. It means you'll see. It means the city will know. It means quarantine or worse. Forced removal, locked doors, red crosses painted in ash and desperation. So they hide. They deny. They barricade. There are homes where you knock and hear nothing but feel breath behind the door. You sense eyes peering through slits in the wood. You hear the shuffling of feet. You knock again. No response. Eventually, you leave a mark with chalk, a sign that someone should return, that the silence is not natural. Sometimes you come back and find the door broken open and no one inside. Sometimes you find the same silence, but now there's a smell seeping into the stones. No one talks about those houses. They just sink into the city like cavities in a mouth no one wants to open. Then there are the ones who let you in too quickly. They throw the door wide, beckon you forward, point to the back room with eyes too wide and hands that won't stop shaking. They've been waiting, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The smell hits you first, then the flies, then the sound, low moans, sometimes animalistic, sometimes prayerful, always raw. You step inside. They hover behind you. We did everything we could. We gave her herbs. We burned incense. We kept the windows open, then shut, then open again. We read the Psalms. We hung garlic. You nod. You don't tell them none of it mattered. You don't tell them the moment she started coughing blood. It was already over. You ask when it started. They can't remember. Time stopped 3 fevers ago. You finish your work. You leave instructions. Boil water. Burn linens. Don't touch the body. They nod. They won't do any of it. Not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. These are not wicked people. They are scared, overworked, underfed, and slowly unraveling. You see the guilt in their eyes, the knowledge that they waited too long, the fear that they are next. You see children hiding behind curtains, eyes locked on your mask. You see old men pretending to sleep. You see women gripping rosaries, so hard their fingers bleed. This isn't a city anymore. It's a museum of panic. Sometimes they ask questions. Will the city help us? No. Will there be food? Probably not. Is it true that the South Gate is closed? Yes. Have you seen rats in other houses? Yes. Will we be safe if we boil vinegar? No. Will you come back tomorrow? You don't answer. You leave. You mark the door. You walk to the next house where the next conversation will be exactly the same. And once in a while, you enter a home that looks normal. Too normal. Clean floors. No smell. A fresh tablecloth. Someone humming in the kitchen. But then you see the signs. A missing chair, a quiet child, a room that's locked because of mice, a pile of burned rags still smoldering in the alley. They're pretending. The plague is already inside. You say nothing. You perform the ritual. You make notes in your book, and you leave, knowing full well you'll be back in 2 days when the singing stops. Cities during plague aren't places. They're pressure cookers with broken lids, filled with fear, sweat, rumors, and enough death to make the rats nervous. Whatever structure once held society together, law, commerce, religion, decency, melts under the heat of contagion. Streets that once bustled with vendors and gossip become haunted passageways echoing with coughs. Bells tolled too often, too flatly. Smoke rises not just from chimneys, but from alleys, rooftops, and pyres. The smell is constant. Human decay mixed with damp stone, burned herbs, and the slow fermentation of fear. This is where you work now. This is the city that pays you in coin and trauma. Welcome home. Quarantine doesn't begin politely. It begins with rumors. Someone fainted in the bakery. Someone's eyes turned black in the tailor's shop. Someone buried a child at dawn without speaking to the priest. Then the orders come. Market shut. School closed. No gatherings. No trade. No travel. The gates are sealed. The watch doubled. And suddenly everyone is looking at everyone else like they might be the next anchor dragging the town underwater. You see it happen again and again. 1 week, life hums. The next, it stops, like a harp string snapped in the middle of song. Streets are blocked with barricades of furniture and carts. Families nail blankets over their windows. Neighbors who once shared bread now share suspicion. Everyone becomes a jailer. Everyone is also jailed. As plague doctor, you're allowed to pass. In theory, this makes you important. In practice, it makes you resented. You walk freely while others huddle. You're seen as necessary but unclean, like the city's chamber pot. Doors open only when they must. People speak to you from a distance, hands clenched, eyes twitching. You knock, and no one answers. Not because they're gone, but because they're praying you'll move on to the next house. Some throw things. Rotten fruit, stones, a dead rat once. You don't blame them. You'd throw things too if death wore boots and a mask and came knocking twice a day. The panic rises in stages. First comes denial, then bargaining with the saints, with the magistrate, with the apothecary who promises garlic will help. Then fury. The city turns on itself. Accusations fly. Foreigners are blamed. Jews are blamed. Witches are blamed. The poor are blamed. You are blamed. The baker's son saw you enter his aunt's house, and now she's dead. The blacksmith's wife touched your robe, and now she's coughing. You can't explain that the sickness was already there. They don't care. Fear has no memory, only heat. Then come the nails. The hammering starts early, echoing through the alleys like a warning. A house is locked from the outside. 1 nail through the door. Then 2. Then boards. Sometimes the residents beg through the cracks, promising they feel fine. Sometimes they stay quiet, resigned. Guards post signs. Infection within. You return a day later and no one answers. A week later and no one breathes. The boards stay in place. No one removes them. The house becomes part of the scenery, a sealed box of silence in A. Street already too quiet. The city government does what it can, which is mostly nothing. Councils meet behind closed shutters. Edicts are posted on walls and ignored by everyone. Bread rations shrink. Water becomes cloudy. The night patrols get drunker. Priests begin performing mass from rooftops, shouting benedictions into the wind while bodies rot beneath their feet. Burials move from the churchyard to the riverbank, from there to the fields. From fields to mass pits dug by prisoners and the poor. You try not to look. Into them, you try not to count. Every city has a tipping point. The moment it stops being a place and becomes a grave. You feel in the air. The way people move less, speak less, stop sweeping their doorsteps. The way music disappears. The way the market square becomes a dumping ground for the unwanted. You see dogs eating things that should not be eaten. You see children playing games where the loser lies still. You see men in good coats pretending not to be afraid while holding rags to their mouths like that ever worked. And through it all, you keep moving. Through closed streets. Through alleys where no one walks anymore. Through neighborhoods where the only sign of life is laundry left hanging too long. You move because you must, because if you stop, you'll notice the weight of the silence pressing down. You'll realize the bells haven't rung for hours. You'll remember that this city once held music, laughter, festivals, weddings, and now it holds nothing but echoes. Echoes and nails. You don't become a plague doctor for the money. Not because the pay is bad, though it is, but because the pay isn't real. It's a promise, a gesture, a formality made under duress by officials who already assume you'll be dead before payday. You're not on a salary. You're on a delay. Cities promise gold, food, housing, even land if things go especially well. But plague contracts are like wedding vows made during a fire. Everyone's too panicked to think clearly, and no one expects to survive long enough to be held accountable. They offer what they don't have to get what they need, which is someone, anyone, willing to walk into infected houses so they don't have to. You sign the contract with your name and a nervous hand. They file it in a drawer that also holds last year's flood victims and 3 unpaid rat catchers. And from that moment on, you're working on credit and borrowed time. Sometimes, if the city is relatively stable, you're paid in installments. Coin, yes, but not the kind you can spend without drawing attention. Plague doctor currency is always suspicious. Foreign silver, old bishopric tokens, clipped copper from bad years, blood-stained ducats that make merchants raise eyebrows and ask how many corpses you had to step over to earn them. No one wants to touch your money. Shopkeepers pretend not to see you. Bakers wave you off before you even speak. Even the taverns, those last desperate dens of the damned, hesitate to serve you unless you drink outside, away from the good customers. You eat standing up. You buy food wrapped in rags. You leave coins on windowsills and take the loaf before the door reopens. More often than not, you're paid in things, not cash, but compensation, a sack of grain, a basket of onions, a wheel of cheese so hard it could be used to break bones, a bed of straw in an attic that smells like someone died there, which they probably did, a meal offered silently, pushed across the table without eye contact. You accept these with the same reverence a priest gives a holy relic because you're not in a position to negotiate. One bowl of broth is worth a day's labor. One egg is a rare kindness. One dry blanket is a miracle. And still, you're never sure if it's payment or pity. You nod thanks anyway, because asking is worse. Some towns promise larger rewards. Parcels of land, city titles, a pension paid in perpetuity. But those promises have clauses. You must survive. You must stay. You must not speak of what you've seen. And you must wait. Wait for the city council to reconvene. Wait for the vaults to be unsealed. Wait for the markets to reopen and the tax rolls to be restored. By the time any of that happens, assuming it does, you're either gone or buried. And if you do survive, they'll find excuses. We appreciate your service, but the treasury has been depleted. There is no record of the contract. That was the previous magistrate's arrangement. Surely you wouldn't demand compensation while the city is still grieving. And that's the honest cities. Others are more creative. You're accused of malpractice, of spreading the disease rather than containing it. You're blamed for the deaths of important people. You're declared unclean. Your belongings are burned. Your name erased. You walk into a city as a necessary evil and walk out as an unwanted witness. If you walk out at all. Because sometimes the final payment is silence. The kind enforced by a shallow grave and a hastily written report that says, "The doctor perished in service. No further inquiry required." But the worst payment isn't the coins or the food or the sack of rotting turnips someone leaves outside your door in lieu of rent. It's the blame, the sideways glances, the curses muttered in corners, the child who spits when you pass, the woman who crosses herself 3 times and whispers devil under her breath. You take these with the same composure you take everything else, quietly, mechanically, knowing they're inevitable. Because when people are dying, they need someone to hate. And you, with your mask and your stick and your stink of vinegar and failure, are the easiest target. They can't strike the plague, but they can strike you. So yes, you're paid. In moldy bread. In suspicion. In the honor of not being beaten to death with a shovel by a grieving father. You collect your wages like a beggar collects alms. Not because you want to, but because if you don't, you starve. And every day, you add it up in your head. A week of labor, 20 houses visited, 13 deaths confirmed, 1 minor miracle. Compensation. A sack of potatoes and the knowledge that half the city hopes you choke on them. You walk through the city like a ghost with a price on your soul. And it's not just because of the mask, or the smell, or the deaths that seem to follow in your footsteps. It's because people believe you're cursed. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, but literally, a walking vessel of disease and devilry sent by powers unknown to punish the sinful, the careless, or the just unlucky. No one trusts you. Not the sick, not the healthy, not even the rats, who scatter when they hear your boots. The superstition clings to you thicker than the plague itself, woven into whispers, gestures, glances that last too long, and children taught to hide when you pass. To them, you're not a doctor. You are a dark omen in bird disguise, a harbinger of rot who speaks Latin backwards and stares too long into dying eyes. The rumors about you are endless. That your mask holds not herbs, but ashes of unbaptized infants. That your stick is carved from cursed wood, stolen from a gallows tree at midnight. That your robe was sewn from the skin of plague victims who screamed as they died. That your breath, if smelled directly, can rot teeth in the skull. That you don't sleep, don't eat, don't bleed. That you are, in fact, already dead. Kept moving only by the weight of your sins and a pact you signed in blood with. Something that doesn't answer to saints. You'd laugh, but it's not funny anymore. Not when someone throws salt at your feet like you're a demon passing through a threshold. Not when a merchant refuses to sell you garlic because it might turn you back into your true form. Not when children shout that you blinked and a cow miscarried in the next village. They say you infect houses by entering them. That you mark the door not to track the plague, but to invite it. That you carry fleas in your mask. That your gloves are soaked in poison. That the herbs in your beak are a spell, part apothecary, part necromancy. And if one falls out, someone dies within the hour. They believe your eyes can kill. That your gaze curses the blood. That your very presence accelerates the fever. Some believe you choose who dies. That you whisper names into the sleeves of the sick and their souls flee at the sound. Others think you're a collector, sent by hell to tally the condemned and carry their names home. People hide from you not just out of fear, but out of the belief that proximity alone invites doom. You pass someone in the street and they spit twice, knock their knuckles against wood, whisper a prayer through clenched teeth. You knock on a door and hear water being flung. Not at you, but at the threshold. Holy water if they're rich, or just water from the well if they're desperate. Once a woman screamed when you turned your head toward her. She said you had no shadow. You did, it was. Just hard to see in the fog. Didn't matter. She wailed and threw herself on the ground, begging forgiveness for a sin you'd never accuse her of. You stepped over her and didn't look back. You couldn't afford to. Some towns post warnings when you arrive. Not signs saying plague doctor, but signs saying beware. They warn their citizens not to talk to you, not to look you in the face, not to let their children near you, not to let your shadow fall across their doorstep. Priests denounce your methods as unnatural. Herbalists say your concoctions spoil the spirit. Midwives claim your mask stunts breath. A butcher once claimed his best pig died because you touched its pen. You hadn't, but try proving. Innocence to a man who's already weeping over pork. You've been called witch, devil, ghoul, thief of breath. One boy said you were the night crow, a spirit that eats lungs in the dark. One man swore you hovered above the church roof at midnight, shrieking. One woman claimed you entered her dreams, masked and wordless, and since then her cat won't look her in the eye. These stories spread like fire. You don't know who starts them, but you know how they end, with someone throwing stones or fire or both. You've learned to walk fast, avoid crowds. Keep your head down even though you're the only one wearing a beak. And the worst part? Sometimes you almost believe it. Not the magic, not the curses, but the feeling that you're no longer human, that you don't belong among the living, that your presence poisons air and prayer alike. You stop speaking unless necessary. You move like a shadow, speak like an echo, and eventually, even you stop looking at your own reflection. Because if enough people believe you're a monster, sooner or later, you start to act like one. Not from malice, from exhaustion, from distance, from a knowledge that superstition spreads faster than reason. And in this city, that's the only epidemic no one wants to cure. You try to heal them. That's the cruelest part. You don't show up waving your arms, declaring that everyone's doomed. No, you arrive with a stick, a satchel, a mask full of dead flowers, and the absurd conviction that maybe this time something will work. That some ancient treatment, some improvised remedy, some whispered recipe passed through the hands of 4 desperate herbalists, and a monk with a burn on his face will finally do more than prolong the agony. You go in knowing you're not a miracle worker, and you leave praying you didn't make it worse. It starts with the swellings, the buboes, black and hot, pulsing beneath the skin like buried wasp hives. They appear under the arms and the groin, behind the ears, swollen with whatever horror the body can't expel. They stink before they burst. The skin around them shines like stretched parchment, trembling at the touch. You press a finger against one, and it trembles, like it's considering whether to rupture now or wait until you've turned your back. The family stands behind you, silent, waiting for you to save someone. You reach into your kit and pull out the knife, not a scalpel, not a surgeon's blade, just the cleanest sharp thing you own, and you cut, slowly, carefully. You brace yourself, and then it bursts. The sound is always the same, a wet pop, followed by a hiss and a smell that makes your stomach flip. The fluid sprays, thick and foul, yellow-black like old oil and salt. The patient screams, or doesn't. Some are past screaming, some pass out, some weep. You clean the wound with vinegar and pray it's enough. You stuff it with herbs. You cover with cloth. You bind it tightly. You burn the knife and wash your gloves and leave knowing it will almost certainly swell again by morning. And if it doesn't, the lungs will go next. If the swellings haven't started, it's the fever, the fire that eats from the inside. You feel their foreheads, their chests, their hands. They're burning alive in slow motion, bodies drenched in sweat and shaking. You give them water, cold cloths, crushed mint, whatever you have. Sometimes you bleed them because the old texts say it draws the sickness out. You watch as their blood flows into a bowl, thinner than it should be, darker. You pretend this is progress. You pat their hand, tell them. They're brave. They nod. Then they seize. Sometimes they bite through their tongues. Sometimes they vomit. Sometimes they just go still. There are the vomiters, the bleeders, the ones whose skin goes purple before your eyes. You try garlic. You try honey. You try wine boiled with sage and salt. You pour liquids down their throats and whisper the names of saints you barely remember. You wave incense. You draw sigils with blessed chalk. You burn herbs, chant over vinegar, tie iron keys to their feet. You rub their temples with crushed violets. Nothing works. You apply poultices that slide off in the night. You administer leeches that fall asleep before they finish. You recite prayers you haven't believed since your third funeral. It doesn't matter. The body fights and loses again and again. You watch it happen a dozen times a day. The lungs are worst. When it reaches the chest, there's nothing left to do. They breathe in ragged gasps, rattling like wind through a ruined gate. You hear the fluid before they speak. Sometimes they can't speak. They just look at you with wet eyes and a mouth full of red foam. You hold their hand, if you dare. They die slowly, painfully, without dignity. Their last moments sound like drowning in slow motion. Their families ask you what to do. You say make them comfortable. You don't say how. There is no comfort left. Children are the worst. They don't understand. They beg for sweets, for stories, for someone who isn't you. You kneel by their side, whisper kindnesses you don't believe. You stroke their hair with a gloved hand and lie. You say it's not the plague. You say they'll be well by tomorrow. You say they're strong. You say what their parents need to hear. Then you stand and mark the door with chalk. You never go back. And still, you try. You show up with your tools and your tinctures and your makeshift sense of duty. You pack open wounds with herb that would barely flavor a soup. You drain limbs. You scrape blackness from tongues. You pray while pretending you're not praying. And when they die, because they always die, you write their name, close their eyes, and move on. Every cure is a theater. Every treatment is performance. And yet you keep doing it, not because you believe, but because they do. Because a mother's eyes light up when you say you'll try something new. Because a father's shoulders straighten when you say you've seen worse and they pulled through. Because even as they lie dying, people want to believe someone is fighting for them. Even if the only weapon you have is hope with a knife taped to it. No one tells you how many ways you can poison yourself just by doing your job. It's not in the contract. No one sits you down and says, by the way, every substance in your bag is slightly lethal. The air you breathe is soaked in death. And sooner or later, you'll ingest something that makes your skin burn from the inside or your teeth feel like they're trying to walk out of your gums. But you learn quickly, because being a plague doctor doesn't just mean dodging infection. It means surviving your own medicine, your own ignorance, and the slow realization that the line between treatment and toxin is razor thin and covered in blistering oil. You start with the herbs. The same handful of crushed plants you stuff into your beak every morning are also the same ones that slowly seep into your lungs, your throat, your blood. You think lavender will calm your nerves until the headaches start and your vision swims. You think rue will purify the air until you wake up one night choking on your own breath, your nose bleeding into the inside of your mask. You think wormwood is cleansing until your hands shake so badly you drop your knife. Mid-incision and nearly open your own thigh. The dried mint you pack for clarity causes nosebleeds if you breathe too deeply. Sage makes your tongue tingle. Myrrh burns your throat. And someone once told you cloves cure fever. But after 3 hours inhaling nothing but powdered clove through damp wool, you vomited in a doorway and spent the rest of the day hallucinating that the corpses were singing to you. Then come the tinctures. You make them yourself because no apothecary wants to prepare doses for the walking mask. You mix wine with vinegar, crush bark, boil leaves, add whatever fungus hasn't turned blue yet. You taste it, just to be sure it won't kill the patient instantly, and spend the next 2 hours with stomach cramps that make you walk like your knees are broken. You forget which powders are safe and which aren't. Some powders look the same. One relieves pain, one causes bleeding from the ears. One is supposed to reduce swelling, but last week you tried it and your fingernails turned black for 3 days. You try not to reuse that one, but you're tired. You forget. You reach for the wrong bottle. Mix it with the wrong wine, apply it to the wrong sore, and hope no one notices when your hands start to tremble. The worst, of course, is when it's you. When the nausea starts before you've eaten anything. When the world tilts even though you're standing still. When your gloves feel too tight and your robe is suddenly too heavy and your thoughts are sticking together like wet parchment. You try to blame the heat, the weight of the mask, dehydration, hunger. You tell yourself you're just tired, that you'll feel better once you sit down, once you drink something, once you sleep, but you don't. The pain grows behind your eyes. Your joints ache. You forget the names of herbs you've used 100 times. You forget what day it is. You forget how many fingers that man had when you started. And then comes the fever. It creeps in like fog, soft at first, a flush in your cheeks, a dampness in your shirt. You feel warm under the mask, then hot, then soaked. Your breath rasps. The vinegar in your beak stings your eyes. Your hands shake. You drop a cup. You break a bottle. The herbs fall, scatter, mix on the floor like a warning. You sit down, head spinning, vision gone narrow and gray. You try to remember the symptoms of the plague. You try to deny they match your own. You fail, and for one long hour, you sit, motionless in a ruined kitchen, listening to someone wheeze in the next room, wondering if you should tell them you're not just the doctor anymore. You're the next patient. Sometimes it's not even medicine that poisons you. It's the city, the air in the alley behind the tailor's shop where corpses are stacked like firewood. The mildew in the cellar where you examined 3 children and found 4 dead rats. The rotting linen in the priest's chamber that gave off a smell so thick you could taste it through your mask. You breathe in death every day, and sooner or later, it sticks. You cough at night. You spit black in the morning. Your urine turns the color of bad. Soup. Your stomach knots and unknots without permission. You feel hot even when it snows. And still, you go on, because you don't know if it's the plague or poison or exhaustion, because there's no one to ask, because there's no doctor for the doctor, because you can't afford to stop. You put your mask back on, swallow bile, steady your hands, and open the next door. And if your vision swims a little when the candle flickers, if your legs shake when you kneel, if you feel your pulse stuttering like a broken bell, well, that's just the price of your profession. That's just what happens when you try to heal death by drinking it, breathing it, and bathing in it daily. You don't die once. You die slowly, in doses. And the worst part is, you don't even know which one will finally finish the job. The plague, the poison, or the moment you look at your own shaking hands and realize you can't tell the difference anymore. No one loves the plague doctor. They tolerate you, fear you, resent you, spit after you. But love? That's reserved for saints and bakers, not men who walk into houses and make people disappear. You are a necessary evil, an unavoidable shadow, the black silhouette on the skyline that makes mothers whisper in fathers' bar doors just a little earlier. The only thing worse than your arrival is your absence, and even that's debatable. When things go wrong, and they always go wrong, they blame the sickness, then they blame God, then they blame you. To the average citizen, you are the problem, not the rats, not the wells, not the cramped tenements or the rotting trash or the festering food. You walked in the neighborhood, and 3 days later, their cousin's coughing blood. You touched a door frame, and now there's a red X on it. You spoke with the magistrate, and suddenly the city gates closed. They don't understand how the plague spreads, but they know correlation. They know that every time you appear, someone vanishes behind a window and never comes out. They know your stick taps like a knell. They know your mask smells like vinegar and death. That's enough. They don't shout insults. They whisper them. You walk past, and conversations go silent. You hear your name twisted, mispronounced, used like a curse. Parents threaten their children with stories of the doctor who takes the bad ones away. Boys throw pebbles at your back. Girls clutch their amulets until their knuckles go white. Shopkeepers step away from their stalls. Beggars stop begging. Even the dogs grow quiet when you pass. You are not a man. You are a warning carved into the shape of one. And when fear boils over, it turns violent. You've been shoved, tripped, cornered. Once, someone threw hot pitch at your cloak. Another time, a man swung an axe at your shadow. His wife had died that morning. You didn't blame him, but you never forgot the sound. People scream that your mask is cursed, that you carry death in your bag, that your very breath infects the street. One priest claimed you were the devil's scribe, writing names into your ledger for hell to collect. A crowd gathered. Someone tried to pull off your mask. You fought. You ran. The stick broke against someone's ribs. You left blood behind. You left parts of yourself behind. You no longer go out at night. Not alone. Not without alerting someone. You avoid narrow alleys, large crowds, the main square. You speak softly. You bow your head. You learn to walk like a servant, not an executioner. You keep your stick low, your voice lower. But it doesn't help. You could heal 10 children and they'd still call for your mask to be burned the next time an old woman dies after you visit. You could save a magistrate's wife and be blamed for the fever his cook develops 2 days. Later, no deed is good enough. No cure is fast enough. No act of mercy outweighs the image of your silhouette in someone's doorway. There's no such thing as gratitude in a city losing its mind. The families who thank you in whispers are gone by the end of the week. The guards who nod at your passing vanish without ceremony. You attend Mass in the back. You leave before the final hymn. You never kneel. You never drink from the shared cup. The congregation watches your every move, and when you step outside, a child draws a cross on the stone where your foot had rested. You hear rumors about yourself, that you dig up graves at night, that you live with the dead, that you sleep in your mask, that you eat boiled hearts for strength, that your robe is lined with plague scabs. You try not to care. You try to laugh. You fail, because even the smallest lies gather weight when they're spoken in fear. Even the most absurd stories start to sound possible when they're repeated in candlelit rooms by trembling mouths desperate for someone to blame. The city does not embrace you. It endures you. And when the fever wanes, when the deaths slow, when the bells ring less and the rats scatter, and the air begins to smell like bread again, that's when they turn completely. They ask why you're still here. They say you've done enough. They hint that you've stayed too long. Your quarters are moved. Your food ration shrinks. The council becomes vague about your stipend. One morning, you find a sign painted in charcoal on your door, out. Because in the end, you were never a healer. You were a scarecrow in a plague field. And now that the harvest is over, the city doesn't want to look at you anymore. You remind them of everything they lost and everything they still fear. They can't cleanse their homes until you're gone. They can't believe they're safe while you're still visible. And so, they make you invisible again and again until one day, someone does try to burn a mask. And this time, they don't miss. You think maybe the church will be different. Maybe the men in robes will see you not as a plague vector or a masked freak, but as a fellow servant of something larger, someone sent not to condemn but to comfort. You think, foolishly, desperately, that within the cold stone walls of the sanctuary, you might find a moment of recognition, of peace, of shared purpose. You're wrong. The church doesn't see a doctor when you enter. It sees a problem, a disruption, a walking contradiction wrapped in boiled leather and heresy. Because what you represent, uncertainty, decay, panic, failure, doesn't fit in the stained glass windows or the gilded altars. You walk in hoping for absolution, and you leave with a wet cough and a bucket of holy water dripping down your back. The clergy at first are cautious. They greet you with the politeness reserved for lepers who might be wealthy. They bless you from a distance, hold incense like a shield, and offer advice that sounds suspiciously like superstition wrapped in Latin. Burn rosemary, hang crosses, pray the 15th Psalm at dusk with both feet on consecrated ground. You nod. You pretend to take notes. You know they're stalling. Because once the fever reaches the cloister, the doors close, they bolt from the inside. And if you knock, they don't answer. Because God may be everywhere, but the bishop insists he does not enter with a plague doctor behind him. Sometimes they call you in, not to heal, to witness. A monk coughing blood, a nun bleeding from the nose, a choir boy collapsed in the aisle. You arrive, perform your ritual, administer your useless herbs, sprinkle vinegar in a place that still smells of myrrh and rot, and watch as the congregation slowly moves away from you like you're dripping fire. The priest thanks you with tight lips. He gestures toward the sacristy. You understand. Leave. Your presence disturbs the holiness. Your mask offends a sacred silence. You exit through the side door. You mark the door frame in chalk. Later that week, someone scrubs it off. There are moments, rare and terrible, when the church blames you outright. You entered the cathedral and the abbot died. You spoke with the altar boy, and now he sleeps for 20 hours a day and mumbles about crows. You walked the length of the nave, and now the floor smells wrong. They don't accuse you directly. They preach sermons about hidden corruption, about servants of science over spirit, about the arrogance of man who forgets that only God gives and takes breath. You listen from the back pew. You don't bow your head. You can't. The beak makes it hard. Holy water is their favorite weapon, sprinkled on your shoulders, flung in your path, dumped on your gloves. Once a deacon tried to douse your mass completely, muttering exorcisms while you stood in silence. Blinking behind fog lenses is stale, gritty droplets slid down your face. You didn't stop him. You were too tired, too used to the ritual, too aware of that in their eyes. The only difference between a plague doctor and a demon is whether you bleed when cut. Confession is a cruel joke. Who would hear yours? Who would listen to a list of names, faces, failed remedies, desperate prayers muttered beside boiling lungs? No priest wants to hear how many died after you bled them, how many coughed harder after your visit, how many clutched your hand and whispered that they weren't ready. The confessional is not designed for your sins. It is too small, too dark. It would crack under the weight of everything you've seen and everything you couldn't fix. So you don't kneel. You don't speak. You pray, maybe, but only quietly, to the empty space between pews, to the rafters, to no one. You try once to attend a mass, a real one. You arrive early. You sit in the back. You lower your hood. People turn. They don't speak. They just shift away. The priest glances up from the altar and stutters over his words. Halfway through the reading, someone coughs, and half the congregation turns to you like your breath reached them through 50 feet of stone. You leave before communion. You don't look back. You never try again. They hang crucifixes above every doorway now. Not for worship, for warding. They think if the plague sees the cross, it will turn around. That if they hang rosaries on the fence, your shadow won't cross the threshold. That if they whisper enough prayers fast enough, the sick will get better and you'll vanish. They don't understand. This isn't a matter of heaven. This is rot and rats and physics and time always wins. Still, you keep going to the churches, to the chapels, to the broken shrines at the edge of town, where mothers light candles for children who stop breathing before the third bell. You stand in the doorway, hands clasped behind your back, breathing damp herbs and doubt. No one invites you in, but you stay just long enough to see the wax melt. And then you move on, because in the end, you're not looking for salvation. You're looking for anything that still feels sacred in a city that only remembers how to burn. There's no such thing as a normal workday when you're a plague doctor. No shift bell, no lunch break, no moment where someone pats you on the shoulder and says, "Well done. That's enough death for today." You wake up, if you slept at all, and immediately step into the stinking machinery of the dying city. The gears don't stop turning. The corpses don't wait. There are too many doors, too many names, too many cries from behind boarded windows, and too little time. You dress in silence. You soak. Your gloves in vinegar. You stare at the mask like it might protest, like it might refuse to go back onto your face. It doesn't. It never does. You pull it on and become the bird again. Your morning begins with a list. Names scrawled in ink and fear. Addresses bleeding through cheap parchment, sometimes already crossed out by the time you arrive. You start at the eastern edge of the district because the sun hits there first, and you can at least pretend it's warming you. You knock. You wait. You enter. One dead. Two sick. One missing. You take notes. You advise burning the linens. You glance at the child with glassy eyes and know they won't see dusk. You leave. Second house. Third. By the fifth, you're already sweating under the mask. By the seventh, the beak is clogged with damp herb paste and your breath tastes like old socks and time. At noon, your robe weighs 10 pounds more than it did at dawn. The leather soaks everything: sweat, blood, spilled broth, a small amount of someone's lung. You don't remember how it got there. You wipe your hands with a cloth that hasn't been cleaned since last week. You pour vinegar over your stick and watch as it runs brown down the wood. You pass through streets where doors are nailed shut, where children sit silent in windows, where dogs bark once and then disappear into alleys filled with quiet. Someone calls your name. You don't recognize the voice. You keep walking. You haven't eaten since yesterday, but food feels like a joke. Your stomach has learned to survive on panic and boiled water. The afternoon is worse. The light turns gray, then gold, then red, and you realize you've been inside 8 homes and can't remember a single face. They blend. The same glazed eyes, the same purple blotches, the same desperate questions. You stop answering. You nod. You offer water. You bless the house with chalk and smoke and a handful of crushed rosemary. You say you'll come back tomorrow. You won't. You can't. The list gets longer every day, and you already gave up pretending you could keep up. You're not solving anything. You're mopping up a flood with a wet rag and lying about the results. Around sunset, you reach the hospice, a converted granary, once full of grain, now full of dying breath. Rows of cots line the walls, some occupied, some waiting. The stench hits you like a punishment. Piss, pus, fever, burnt cloth, and the bitter tang of lie. The staff, what's left of them, nod at you without meeting your eyes. You examine patients. You try to sound like you know what you're doing. You dab ointment on a skin that peels beneath your fingers. You remove a leech that's bloated. With failure, you wrap a child in a blanket and tell her mother it's just the fever. You help a priest into a chair so he can give last rites to a man who already stopped breathing. You pretend the ritual matters. When night comes, you're still working. You walk with a lantern, your shadow thrown against the walls like a second mask, warped and trembling. You visit a house no one else will enter, the one with the screaming. You knock. No answer. You push the door open and step into something soft. The smell tells you everything before your eyes catch up. 3 bodies. One moving. You kneel. You speak gently. The voice that answers you is afraid and grateful and too weak to hold a cup. You help them. Drink. You clean their face. You leave them with a prayer you forgot the meaning of years ago. Eventually, your feet stop obeying. You sit down in a stairwell. Just for a moment. Just to breathe. You fall asleep. Mask on. Gloves sticky. Hands limp. You wake up coughing. You check your pulse. Still alive. For now. You stand. You return to the quarter where the last candle still burns. You knock once more. No answer. You mark the door. You walk home. Home is a cot in a stone cell, a basin, a cracked mirror, a crust of bread. You remove your robe slowly, like peeling off regret. The gloves come last. Your hands are pale, shriveled, trembling. You stare at them like they belong to someone else. You don't speak. You wash with cold water that stings the cracks in your skin. You write down names. You cross out two. You stare at one you missed. You lie down fully clothed because changing is too much effort. You close your eyes. The mask is still. On the table. You see it even in the dark. And in 5 hours, you will do it again. You tell yourself you're fine. That the things you see are normal under the circumstances. That the voice whispering behind your left ear as you grind herbs is just the wind slipping through the shutters. That the shape you glimpsed behind the window wasn't watching you. It was only your reflection, distorted by the grime. You repeat it enough that you start to believe it, until you wake up screaming into your mask with your fingernails digging through the mattress and your knees pulled too. Your chest like a child in a thunderstorm. But even then, you get up, because the moment you admit you're unraveling is the moment you lose the only tool you still have. Control, or at least the performance of it. You stop dreaming about normal things. No family, no conversations, no memories of warm hands or sunlight or the smell of baking bread. You dream of lungs full of gravel, of people coughing your name instead of blood, of walls that bleed and eyes that blink from under floorboards. You dream of treating corpses who whisper thanks as you cut them open. You dream of children walking backwards on hands that bend the wrong way. And when you wake up, it takes a full minute to remember which world is. Real, the one with masks and vinegar, or the one where the fever speaks to you in your own voice. The hallucinations are hardest to pin down. They don't shout. They slide, a shadow that lingers too long, a stain that wasn't there yesterday. A patient who blinks with the face of someone you buried a week ago. You double-check names, addresses, faces. You begin carrying your own notes like a tether to reality. Still, you forget things. Not just small things, entire houses. You arrive at a door with no memory of the family inside. You treat a woman and discover her name written in your own handwriting from 3 days prior, under a note that says already gone. You laugh. You stop laughing. You burn the paper. The guilt is constant. It doesn't need cause or reason. It clings to everything. Every failure is your fault. Every worsening fever, every burst bubo, every scream behind a closed door, your fault. Even when you weren't there, especially when you weren't there, you start to believe that your presence kills. That if you had stayed home, more people might have lived. You begin to delay your rounds, not out of laziness, but out of mercy. You tell yourself that maybe today, staying away is the best medicine. Then the dreams worsen, and you return to work with shaking hands and your mouth full of apologies that no one asks for. You become afraid of silence. It feels like waiting, like judgment. Like the city is holding its breath just to see what you'll break next. So you talk to the sick, to the dead, to yourself. You narrate your emotions. You ask questions you don't expect answered. How are we feeling? Do you think this will help? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't look at me like that. You hum songs you don't remember learning. You whisper prayers in a linen bandages. And sometimes when it's very quiet, you hear your own voice answering back, in a tone you don't recognize, with words you didn't mean to say. You avoid mirrors. There are few, but even puddles are dangerous now. Once you saw your reflection blink when you didn't. Once the mask moved without your face. Once you took the mask off and forgot what was underneath. You stared into your own eyes and saw nothing. Just empty windows in a ruined house. You put the mask back on and left it there. For 3 days, you didn't take it off at all. Not to eat, not to sleep, not to breathe. You stopped noticing. The nightmares blur with memory. You wake up with blood on your gloves and no memory of why. You find notes in your handwriting that say, "Don't go back," and it's still in the walls. You don't remember writing them. You follow the advice anyway. You hear footsteps behind you in empty rooms. You hear children singing in basements that were bricked up years ago. You smell smoke when there's no fire. You see faces behind curtains and blink until they vanish. You tell yourself it's just exhaustion. You tell yourself it's just stress. You tell yourself a lot of things. Eventually, you lose count of days, of deaths, of symptoms, of sins. You start to think you died months ago, and this is just the body going through the motions. You start to believe that the mask isn't for protection. It's a lid to keep what's inside from leaking out. That if you took it off for too long, your thoughts would slither down your chest and pool on the floor. So you keep it on. You wear it even when alone. You talk to it like it's a friend. You listen when it talks back. There is no therapy, no confession, no relief. You work until you forget what it felt like not to. You cry in silence and don't wipe your eyes because you don't know if it's tears or sweat or something worse. You begin to envy the dead, not for their peace, but for their clarity. You begin to wonder how many more days until you make a mistake large enough to free you from the choice. And when that day comes, you won't fight it. You'll just hope someone else is foolish enough to put on a mask. Afterward, you've always known it was coming. You just hoped you wouldn't notice, that it would strike in your sleep, quick and clean, like a candle blown out, that your last breath would be wrapped in dreams, not vinegar. But that's not how it works. The plague is not merciful, not poetic, not even punctual. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder. It seeps in, through leather, through pores, through the cracks you didn't notice in your gloves. And one day, your hand trembles too long. Your knees don't stop. Aching, your breath takes effort. And you don't say it. You don't have to. Your body speaks it fluently now. At first, you deny. You blame the weather, the workload, the weeks without sleep, the hunger you called routine. You recite symptoms like a mantra and tell yourself yours don't match. You pretend the swelling is from walking. The heat is from the robe. The stiffness in your neck is just bad posture. You gargle vinegar. You stuff your beak with stronger herbs. You chew dry sage until your teeth ache, but you feel it behind your ribs. Beneath your skin, it's there, and it's waiting. The first real sign is the cough. Not the occasional rasp you've had for months, not the dry tickle from herb dust. No, this one starts deep and pulls something from inside you that shouldn't have come out. You hide it. You learn to turn away just in time. You pretend to examine someone's rash just long enough to hack into your sleeve. You wipe your mouth before they see the color. You clean your gloves with such obsessive precision that they start to crack. But the cough comes back, louder, wetter, familiar. You've heard it too many times from too many mouths to mistake it. Then the fever, not a mild flush, not the warm haze from a long day, a real one. You wake up soaked, drenched in your own sweat. You touch your forehead and it burns. You can't see straight. You stumble into walls. The mask grows heavier by the hour. You taste copper. You start skipping houses, not out of exhaustion, but out of fear that if you knock, you won't be able to speak. That someone will hear the rattle in your lungs and slam the door in your face. That your name will be the next, scratched into the door of the hospice. You don't report it. Of course not. There's no one to report it to. The Physicians Guild is gone. The surgeons died months ago. The other doctors? Missing, coughing, burned in their own robes. There's no registry, no ceremony, no gentle hand to guide you to a cot. You're the last, and when the last doctor falls, no one writes it down. They just stop waiting for help. You try to work, you try to focus, you try to stay upright, but your hands betray you. You drop your tools. You forget names mid-sentence. You mistake a healthy child's flush for early necrosis and nearly leach him before the mother screams. You apologize, but it's slurred. Your words bend sideways. People notice. They keep their distance. You can see it in their eyes. The moment when fear shifts from the disease to the doctor. You are no longer the cure. You are the warning sign, the omen. You sit alone. You take off the mask and stare at your own face. It's gray, slick. Your lips tremble. Your gums ache. Your neck itches in that deep, burning way that always precedes the swell. You press your fingers under your jaw and find it. The node, small, firm, tender, growing. You sit very still. You count your breaths. You remember every time you told a patient this meant the clock had started. That from here, it was a matter of hours, maybe days, if they were lucky. You never told them. What it felt like. You walk into the night. You don't know why. Maybe looking for air. Maybe trying to outrun your own blood. The streets are quiet. No bells. No cries. Just the sound of your feet on stone and the wind rattling loose shutters. You realize you don't want to die indoors. Not in the cot. Not under a blanket soaked in someone else's sweat. You want the sky. Even if it's just a strip between buildings. You want the stars to see you. You sit down on a step. You remove your gloves, slowly, carefully, like ritual. Your hands are blotched. Your fingertips blue. You feel the heat rising from your belly to your throat. Your pulse sounds like boots on cobblestones. You breathe. Once, twice. Then the pain hits. And suddenly you understand what all those screams were trying to say. You try not to make a sound. You wonder if someone will find you. If they'll recognize the mask beside you. If they'll bury you properly. Or if they'll burn the robe, scatter the ashes, and curse your name for bringing death too close. You close your eyes, not out of peace, out of necessity. The fever makes them burn. You do not expect mercy. You only hope your hands won't tremble too much when it's time to do what you swore you'd never do. Treat yourself. The blade, the pustule, the prayer, the fire, whatever comes first. And if it fails, if the plague wins, then at least you'll know exactly how it ends. Because you've seen it so many times before. And now, finally, you get to feel it. You don't know what time it is when your body finally refuses to obey. It might be night. It might be morning. The sky's color has ceased to matter. You only know that you try to stand and your knees folded, that your breath came in fragments, stitched together by will and failure. That when you opened your mouth to call for help, only a dry gasp escaped. No one hears it. No one comes. And why would they? The last time someone followed the sound of a doctor choking in the street, they caught what was in his throat and died 3 days later. The lesson was learned. Let the bird die alone. You are cold, not shivering. That would be a luxury. You are deep cold, the kind that starts in your spine and seeps into your thoughts. Your fingers feel carved from ice. Your toes have stopped sending messages entirely. Your breath steams against the inside of your mask and then vanishes. There is no comfort, no fire, no blanket. The robe that once protected you now clings to you like a damp funeral shroud, heavy and sour with days of sickness and sweat. You lie curled on stone muscles, stiff, joints locked, back twisted in a shape no human should hold for more than a moment. You've been here for hours. No one finds you. No one is looking. The city has learned to step over the collapsed, to glance and keep walking. They assume you're drunk or dead or both. A few know your silhouette. They walk faster. One child stares. His mother pulls him away by the wrist and crosses herself twice. You don't blame them. You wouldn't stop for you either. You try to remember your own name. Not the one they use in the ledger. Not doctor or plague man or beak. The real one. The one from before. It's gone. Lost beneath the mask, buried under years of rot and herbs and sorrow. You try to remember a face, your mother's, a lover's, a friend's. The plague took them, or time did, or maybe you did. All you see is illness. All you hear is coughing. All you feel is pain where your thoughts used to live. Your hands move without your consent. They fumble at the laces of your mask, not out of panic, out of instinct. You want to feel air on your face. You want to die as a man, not a costume. But the ties are stiff with dried sweat and vinegar. Your fingers are numb. You tug. You fail. The mask stays on. It always stays on. You close your eyes. Not because you're tired, because it's too much. The world swims when open. It pulses with nausea and pain and visions that no longer obey reason. You see your own body from above. You see rats gathering near your boots. You hear bells that aren't ringing. You taste dirt. You taste blood. You taste regret. No one mourns you. There will be no candle, no sermon, no name carved in wood. If you're lucky, someone will notice the smell in a few days and drag your body to the fire pit with a hook. If you're not, you'll be left with the dogs and the flies and the children brave enough to poke at death with a stick. Your records will be burned. Your mask will be reused. Your clothes will be stripped and washed and given to a gravedigger with no idea whose skin they used to touch. History will forget you. The city already has. Your last thoughts are not profound. You do not see a light. You do not hear angels. You remember a fevered girl whispering, "Thank you," before dying an hour later. You remember the sound of your own heartbeat slowing. You remember how heavy the mask felt on the first day, and how light it feels now. The wind moves your coat. Somewhere far off, a church bell rings for someone else. The sky begins to brighten, just a little, but you don't see it, because by the time the sun returns, you are already still. And the mask stays on. The city doesn't stop. Not for one man. Not even for the one who kept its blood from boiling over. You die alone, face down in a gutter or curl beneath a shrine or slumped behind hospice where no one looks. And the world continues with the quiet determination of a machine built to forget. The bells ring. The markets open late. The priests deliver sermons thinner than broth. A new name is whispered through the alleys. A new face appears in the same black robe. A new fool tightens the same mask straps. And life continues. Not healed, not better, just differently rotted. He is young. They always are. Not because the young are smarter, quite the opposite, but because they're still dumb enough to believe they'll be different. He shows up with clean gloves, eyes too wide, posture too straight. He says he studied, that he read your notes, that he understands what's at stake. He brings his own vinegar. He uses too much. He overdoes the herbs until his beak smells like a butcher's garden. He calls himself a physician, even though he's not old enough to grow a beard. People stare at him with a mix of pity and hope, like watching someone try to plug a dam with bread. At first, he's enthusiastic. He smiles behind the mask. You can tell by the way his shoulders move. He waves at children. He writes detailed reports. He charts every cough and fever with the intensity of someone who thinks charts can stop decay. He talks to the dying like it will help. He pats hands. He tries to memorize faces. He thinks his voice matters. He wears extra padding under his robe to seem broader, taller, braver. He calls it armor. The city calls it bait. He doesn't understand how fast it goes, how many names there are, how many doors creak open to reveal the same horror. He doesn't know what to do when a family begs for help, and he has nothing but rosemary and boiled wine. He doesn't yet lie well. His apologies sound real. It breaks him faster. His writing grows sloppier. He forgets to change gloves. He stares at the same street corner too long. One day, he asks the gravedigger if he's doing enough. The gravedigger just laughs and lights a pipe. That night, the young doctor doesn't sleep. He visits the hospice. He walks the same halls you walked. He uses your tools, your flask, your stick. He finds a folded note inside the drawer with your name on it. He reads it. He doesn't talk about it. The next day, he burns it. Maybe he thinks it's a test. Maybe he's right. He tries to improve things. That's how you know he's still new. He experiments. He mixes different herbs. He shortens visits to spend more time on each case. He teaches himself to bleed people. He creates a tincture that only kills a third of the patients. He thinks it's a success. The midwives shake their heads. The apothecaries nod politely. The sick don't notice. The dying can't complain. He starts to change. The robe no longer fits right. His shoulders slump. His steps grow silent. He begins to speak less. He stops asking names. He washes his hands so often the skin splits. He stops writing. He stops knocking. The mask begins to stink. He forgets to clean it. He forgets to eat. He forgets to pretend. He doesn't notice when people stop looking him in the eye. He makes a mistake. Everyone does. He prescribes the wrong dosage. He visits the same house twice in one day and doesn't realize it. He forgets to mark a door. The city whispers. Another child dies. A mother screams at him. He doesn't respond. That night, he sits in the same stairwell you once did, head in his hands, fingers trembling. He considers quitting. He doesn't. No one ever does. Not until the fever makes the decision for them. One morning, it doesn't come out. People notice. They knock. No answer. They assume he's praying, or sick, or dead. No one checks. By dusk, another man in a different district ties on the mask. The cycle begins again. Different herbs. Same air, different name. Same fate. The mask is cleaned, dried, dusted with sage, passed down. Every new wearer thinks they'll be the last, that they'll stop it, that they'll outsmart a corpse with wings. But the mask outlives them all. It always does. It was never just a tool. It's a trap, a vow, a confession. Once it touches your face, it remembers you forever. And the city, in its filth and forgetfulness, welcomes its next doctor with the same empty hope. Maybe this one won't die screaming. No one knows how long your body lay there. The city does not mark such things. No bell tolled. No ledger inked your departure. No child wept, save those already crying for other reasons. The wind shifted. The flies gathered. A rat tugged at your sleeve, sniffed, and moved on. Even vermin know when something has already passed beyond flavor. You might have stayed there for days if not for the smell, and even that had to fight for attention amid a city rotting from the inside out. Eventually, a boy was paid a coin to investigate. He came back running, said the Birdman had gone still. The people nodded. Someone sighed. Someone else fetched a cart and a hook. They did not remove your mask. There was no need. They knew what you were, what you had been, what you were now. They used the hook to drag your body onto a splintered wooden platform still slick from the last delivery. Your limbs dangled. Your head bounced. You made no sound. No priest arrived. No rite was read. No hands crossed your chest. The fire was already lit, waiting for whatever had the misfortune of dying that day. They didn't ask your name. Names are for the living. For the dead, ash is enough. The robe took longest. Oil-soaked wool and thick leather don't go quietly. They hiss. They scream. They puff out black clouds that make the mourners gag and the dogs run. Your mask cracked in the heat. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow fracture down the center, like the fire was politely undoing what death had started. Your gloves curled inward, as if your fingers remembered holding and would not release even now. You burned, but not alone. There were others that day. A merchant, a washerwoman, 3 infants in a sack. The fire didn't care. It devoured without discrimination. Flesh, cloth, paper, memory. Someone said a few words. Not for you. Just habit. May they find peace. May the Lord know them. May the fire cleanse what the world could not. But they didn't know who you were, only what you had worn. And that was enough. You were not a man. You were the beak, the robe, the smell of vinegar and despair. You're the last face many had seen before closing their eyes for good. You were a walking omen, a necessary ghost. Now just smoke. Your ashes mixed with others. No urn. No marker. Just the communal pit near the edge of the cemetery where bodies went when no one had coin or kin. Some of the soot blew into the grass. Some settled on a baker's windowsill. Some drifted into the air and disappeared. You were never gathered. You were never claimed. You were simply added to the pile. A child playing nearby found a fragment of your mask the next day. He poked it with a stick, declared it cursed, and buried it under a rock. It stayed there, untouched, until a flood washed it downstream, until a mason found it and used it to prop a crooked shelf, until it fell again and was swept into the city's filth. That's how history holds on to you, not through stories or statues, but through accident, through trash, through things half remembered and badly guessed. The city forgets. It always does. No plaque bears your title. No song mourns your service. The people go on coughing, burying, fearing, and blaming. The plague returns. The mask is passed on. The robe is repaired. The beak is stuffed anew. Another man walks your path, makes your mistakes, feels your fever. And when he dies, he too will burn and be forgotten and fall into ash with you. And so it repeats. You are gone, entirely, utterly, and without exception. And all that remains is the smoke, curling above rooftops like a question no one dares to answer. The city forgets your name, but it remembers your shape. The image lingers like smoke in the rafters, not quite solid, but thick enough to breathe in. The beaked mask, the black robes, the gloved hands, they become symbols, and symbols are never allowed to rot. You do. The symbol doesn't. You become caution first. The shape seen at the edge of alleys, the whisper traded between coughing children, the face imagined by the sick when they begin to wonder if the knock at the door will be the last. Parents invoke you to silence, crying, "Be quiet, or the plague doctor will come," as if you were ever summoned by sound. Then the stories begin. The body forgets, but the mouth remembers. Someone says you could smell death before it arrived. Someone says you walked without touching the ground. Someone else insists you cured 100 men with a single look. No one agrees whether you were a savior or a demon, but everyone agrees you were real, real enough to become metaphor. You stop being a man who died face down in an alley and start being a shape carved into wood, etched into margins, scratched into the walls. Of hospices by dying fingers. You are blamed for things you never did, and credited for acts you wouldn't recognize. They say you delivered babies wrapped in rosemary, that you bled out a bishop's fever with a copper quill, that you lanced your own buboes and survived, that you drank poison to draw it from the air. One legend says you could open a body with a glance. Another claimed your mask had teeth and whispered secrets to the soul. None of it is true, or maybe all of it is. The dead don't get a vote. You become a drawing in a book written by someone who never saw you, a note in the margin of a death register, a saint in one village, a monster in another. The mask appears in carnivals, painted and feathered, stripped of its horror and turned into parody. Children wear it for fun. Nobles wear it for fashion. Artists wear it to say they are brave. No one remembers the smell. No one remembers the weight. They copy your shape and not your silence. Some say your ghost still walks the streets, that it follows plague carts and stands in doorways just before the coughing starts, that it appears to gravediggers and vanishes when addressed, that it weeps in corners of abandoned hospices and carries candles no wind can snuff. They say if you see the doctor, it's already too late. They say you never left, that the city belongs to the mask now. The truth is worse. You are not a ghost. You are a pattern, a necessity, a role waiting for a body. The robe is always repaired. The mask is always found. Another fool always steps forward, thinking knowledge is protection. The city does not summon you. It manufactures you. It folds the mask into the mind of every young man who thinks he can help. And when he dies, it folds again. That is your immortality, not memory, but replication. There will always be another you, and every one of them will think they're the first. The streets fill again, not with celebration, not with safety, but with the same slow shuffle of the barely living. The plague didn't leave with you. It stayed. It nested. It multiplied. It cracked floorboards and ceilings and lungs. The church bells never stopped ringing. They just changed rhythm. The sick still stumble the doors with fingers like roots. The dying still call names that no one answers. The only difference is the silence between cries. Now it feels deeper, older, like it knows. Your name, even if no one else does. You are gone. The sickness remains. The mask changed heads. The disease didn't flinch. You weren't a cure. You weren't even a delay. You were a page in a book that no one will finish reading. Every fever you soothed returned. Every wound you dressed festered. Every family you reassured died anyway. Your successes were illusions, short-lived moments of stillness before the next spasm of death. You told yourself you helped, that you mattered, that your hands, cracked and filthy as they were, held back the flood. But the truth is crueler. It washed over you as if you weren't there. You thought you were part of history, that one day someone would write about you, the doctor who stayed, the doctor who bled, the doctor who burned. But history has no room for maybes. It keeps emperors, generals, liars, and kings. It discards everyone who sweated through nights with a knife in one hand and a prayer in the other. You are a footnote scratched out, a statistic, a smudge of ash on someone else's record. The people didn't thank you. They blamed you. When the death surged, they said you brought it. When the streets emptied, they said you scared them. When your hands shook, they said you were weak. When you died, they said finally. They carved no stone. They built no shrine. The hospice where you slept was torn down and salted. Your room became a latrine. Your tools were burned with the rest of the woodpile. Your bones were never identified. And still, the plague spreads. It does not care for effort. It laughs at sacrifice. It survives medicine, prayer, herbs, vinegar, and fire. You gave everything. It gave nothing back. That is the joke, isn't it? That you, with all your learning and leeches and stubbornness, thought you could outweed a force that has no face and no mercy. You donned a mask to become a wall, but you were only the first brick to crack. Now there's a new you, younger, thinner. His eyes don't tremble yet. He thinks he'll make a difference. He wears your mask, cleans your knives, repeats your mistakes. He doesn't know that by the time he's ready to understand what you went through, he'll be dying too. The epidemic doesn't pause. It doesn't mourn. It doesn't learn. It moved from face to face like a lover with a long memory and no loyalty. You didn't save them. None of them. You tried. That's true. But the plague doesn't care about trying. It only counts the bodies. And the bodies are still piling up. The years pass, faster than they should. The city changes. Cobblestones are replaced. Windows are glazed. The hospice where you died becomes a granary, then a tavern, then a ruin. Plague leaves, returns, transforms. Other diseases arrive with names longer and doctors prouder. They were white instead of black. They write prescriptions instead of prayers, but they still fear breath. They still wash until their hands bleed. They still fail. The mask is retired, hung on a wall in some archive, glassed over and labeled in poor Latin. Early protective equipment, used during outbreaks. No name, no story, no trace of you. Visitors pass it. Most don't look. A few do. They stare through the glass and imagine what it must have felt like to wear it. The weight, the heat, the sound of your own breath echoing in your ears. One child asks if the Birdman was real. The guide shrugs. We think so. The child smiles and says, I want to be like him. The guide laughs. The parent doesn't. Somewhere, deep in the archive silence, a draft moves the mask. It creaks, just a little, like memory exhaling. Time forgets the facts, but clings to the feeling. You become folklore again. Not the grim warning, not the harbinger of death, but the stubborn figure who walked in a fire while others ran. The mask, once feared, becomes a costume again, a symbol of festivals, a motif in plays. They make it blue now, or gold. They sew beads into the beak. They dance in it. They toast to it. They sing songs about how it kept the world standing. They get it all wrong, but you don't mind. Because something beautiful happens. You stop being a man who failed. You become the idea of someone who tried. The disease fades. Not entirely, never entirely, but enough. Streets no longer stink of vinegar. Markets stay open. Children grow up without counting coffins. The hospice is rebuilt. This time as a hospital, real and clean, with beds and bandages and people who listen. They name a wing after the forgotten physicians. Your name's not on the plaque, but the gesture is honest. The mask is mounted above the door, clean now, shining. No soot, no stink, just shape. And one day, a girl walks in wearing a white coat and cracked hands and sees it. She pauses. She looks into the beak as if it's looking back. She's not sure why, but she nods, just once. Then she turns and gets to work. The plague never said thank you, but the world in the smallest, quietest way does. And for the first time since your hands cooled, something like peace wraps around your memory, gentle as cotton, and finally lets you rest.